When the relentless Detroit winter faded into the feverish spring of 1942, Willow Run's cavernous halls trembled beneath the promise of impossible transformation. It was here, amid a metallic jungle of rails, gears, and sparks, that the true engine of change awakened. The first Ford-built B-24 Liberators gingerly rolled off the line in September of that year, awkward, imperfect, and yet profoundly symbolic. Most of these initial machines would never taste the fury of combat, relegated instead to training squadrons. Ford's army of factory veterans, once fluent in the rigid simplicity of car frames, now grappled furiously with the more capricious nature of aircraft. Wings demanded finesse, turrets demanded adaptation. Every tick of the assembly clock was a battle against unfamiliarity. Attending this transition was chaos. Labor turnover soared. In 1 month, Ford hired almost 2,900 workers just to see 3,100 others vanish, driven away by long commutes, wartime rationing, and the numbing anxiety of absence. Gasoline and rubber were strictly rationed, making daily travel to this isolated oasis a feat in itself. The plant soon teetered close to catastrophe, beset by absenteeism and the morale-stripping effects of management's wartime anti-union stance. Union strikes threatened to halt production, just as engineer Charles Sorensen and his team dared promise deliveries at almost miraculous rates, a fantasy. It seemed, with Willow Run described as one of the poorest producers in all the war factories. The threat of government takeover loomed above the Ford name, as the pressure to perform gnawed at Detroit's legacy. Webb and EYs. But in these desperate trenches, every single hour bred innovation. The learning curve was violent and abrupt. Riveters and mechanics faced B-24 blueprints so complex that each machine with 125,000 parts became a test in endurance and hope. Gradually the tide began to turn. The Rosie the Riveter phenomenon swept through the unadorned gates. Thousands of women, defiant and fiercely patriotic, surged in to fill the absence of men swept to the battlefront. Their hands forged the body and heart of American air power, their sweat fueling the transition from factory to frontline. The plant, which once produced 190 planes in June 1943, saw numbers leap to 231 by August, 308 in October, and a staggering 365 by December. Production per worker increased 40-fold, the result of nights spent learning, yearning, and sacrificing for a war that grew more desperate each passing dawn. And then, in the frenzied glory of early 1944, Willow Run achieved what the world insisted was madness: production of 1 bomber per hour. March marked the arrival of the 3,000th B-24. By July, 5,000 B-24s had rolled off the line, half in just the first 6 months of that year alone. The plant hit its stride. A finished aircraft thundered from the doors every 63 minutes, each a testament to the recalibration of Detroit's soul. With each passing week, Willow Run's output became more than numbers on production charts. It turned into the engine driving Allied hopes. By April 1944, 428 B-24s soared away from the assembly line in a single month, with the highest peak 100 bombers dispatched. Between April 24 and April 26, Ford's newly decentralized operations meant parts were assembled not only at Willow Run but also by subcontractors and other Ford plants, with final assembly concentrated in the colossal Michigan space. Knockdown kits, the innovative aircraft in a box, were packed by Willow Run workers and shipped by truck and rail to Douglas Aircraft in Tulsa and Consolidated Aircraft in Fort Worth. Each kit, containing 80% of the necessary parts, bore the fingerprints of Detroit's industrial revolution, and their assembly on arrival only amplified the thunder rolling from Willow Run. Yet, behind the industrial miracle lurked human fragility. Edsel Ford, the president whose vision and tenacity steered Willow Run's course, fell ill from cancer and the crushing weight of war. He died in May 1943, never to see Willow Run hit its stride, but his legacy was written in every rivet and every hour saved. Thousands of workers, men, women, immigrants, slept on 300 makeshift cots near the assembly line, awaiting the relentless sigh of a new bomber preparing to take the skies. They lived among miles of coiled cable, slept amid the clatter of lunch pails, and awoke to the knowledge that each shift brought the Allies closer to hope, and possibly to survival. Web 2. Web 13. The B-24 Liberator would become the most produced heavy bomber in history, a feat Willow Run claimed with certainty by 1945. The Ford plant delivered 6,972 complete bombers, with an additional 1,093 knockdown kits, adding up to an immense 8,865 aircraft that changed not only the war, but the role of the American home front forever. Web 22. At its zenith, Willow Run produced 650 B-24s per month and would often account for 70% of America's total heavy bomber production. Pilots and crews slept in anticipation, in on-site dormitories, sometimes swaddled in nervous expectation or relief, as thundering engines were tested, filled, and sent to battle. This transition from struggle to victory was more than statistical, it was psychological and emotional. The plant's output became synonymous with American power. The Willow Run legacy, stamped not only on blueprints and war records, but in the memories of those who watched the sky transform with the arrival of these metallic titans. Watching the doors open each hour to release a new bomber wasn't merely a mechanical transaction. It was the release of hope, frustration, fear, and ultimately redemption into the skies above Europe and the Pacific. Web 2. Decentralization of production, the streamlining of supply chains, the relentless drive of management and workers, and the sacrifice of Edsel Ford and thousands of anonymous hands set Detroit on a collision course with fate. Every aircraft delivered, every kit dispatched, became a brick in the arsenal of democracy. A roar in the darkness threatening to break the spell Hitler and his Axis allies tried to cast across the globe. In the crucible of Willow Run, precision manufacturing became salvation, and the world watched as Detroit's gamble paid off in thunderous glory. By the end of 1945, as the Allies celebrated victory and the world prayed for peace, Willow Run's silence became as haunting as its roar. Over 8,700 bombers, forged in feverish union and industrial might, had left the assembly line. Willow Run had not merely changed Detroit, it had changed the very course of the air war, and in its shuddering transition from chaos to order, revealed the power of audacity and unity in the face of annihilation. Web round, Web's humans, Web 4. And so the legend grew. Beneath the factory's endless roof, in every corner swept by wartime ghosts, Detroit did not merely answer the call. It rewrote the question. The pulse of Willow Run still beats in forgotten lunchboxes and oil-stained cots, reminding us that when history demanded a miracle, Detroit did not flinch. It produced 1 hour after hour until the world itself was changed. In the shadowed days before America's ultimate leap into the inferno of World War II, an invisible clock ticked furiously against the arc of history. Europe was burning. London's skies thundered with bombs, and across the ocean, a nation of factory whistles and city lights listened in to President Roosevelt as he broke the quiet of a spring radio evening. The United States would build 50,000 warplanes in a single year, a number unthinkable, terrifying in its audacity. But the question that electrified the nation was not whether that goal could be reached, but where and how such a miracle could be conjured, from steel and sweat before the world succumbed to darkness. Web 20. Newsboys hawked headlines on Detroit's rain-soaked corners, and children watched blackouts practiced in fear of the future. All eyes turned to the Motor City. Once famous for Model Ts and thundering V8s, Detroit now found itself called to a far grimmer purpose, not mere mobility for daily life, but the mass production of machines meant to rain destruction on the enemies of freedom. Yet what no one at the time fully understood was that a single location southwest of Detroit, an expanse of rolling farmland, owned by the indomitable Henry Ford, was about to become the crucible where history would be recast in the fires of war. Web 12. Less than a decade before, the Willow Run farm was tranquil, defined by rows of neat crops and the distant clatter of passing trains. In the spring of 1941, everything changed. Under the strained leadership of Edsel Ford, motivated by a plea from the government and the looming shadow of catastrophe, the Ford Motor Company agreed to a contract the world deemed impossible. Their task, to build not just airplane parts but entire bombers, the legendary B-24 Liberators, at a speed and scale never before attempted. And so began the feverish race to construct the Willow Run bomber plant, a feat of logistics and engineering so immense that even its grand design seemed fueled by prophecy. Webb Teamerbantin's architect Albert Kahn, already known as the Architect of Detroit, was handed the Herculean blueprint. His vision was staggering. A factory so vast it covered over 3 million square feet, a mile-long assembly line engineered to twist and turn for maximum efficiency. Indeed, so grand it would become for a time, the largest factory under one roof on the planet. In the hands of Ford, Willow Run's assembly lines would not be measured by yards and feet, but by the thunderous beat of bombers rolling off toward the front lines. Hour by relentless hour Webbenut. The plant's construction itself echoed the urgency of war. Men and women toiled through day and night, scrambling to raise steel walls, install rails and wire electricity at speeds that should have been impossible. The roar of rivet guns and the metallic clang echoed across fields that weeks earlier had known only the gentle sweep of the wind web. The air became charged with a new kind of electricity, a blend of desperation, hope, and the suffocating burden of looming defeat if this gamble failed. But beneath the ambition, chaos threatened. Ford's automotive geniuses found themselves grappling with the alien realities of aviation. The factory struggled to shift from the predictable rhythms of car assembly to the intricate and mutable demands of warcraft. Each B-24 was a leviathan more complex than anything the assembly lines had tamed before. Tools designed for the rigidity of automobile frames balked at the delicate adaptations required for flight. Even worse, the plant struggled to summon workers from distant Detroit, and absent fathers, brothers, and sons soon created a void that only the determined hands of women could fill. Webb. It was here in these halls that legends like Rosie the Riveter were forged, not as propaganda but as living, breathing heroes working against time. At first, Willow Run stumbled and fumbled. Planes rolled from the line late, plagued by defects and plagued by doubts. Public skepticism simmered. Was it folly to think a car company could master the skies? Engineers argued, management despaired, government officials paced sleeplessly, worrying that the Axis would sweep onward unchallenged unless Detroit delivered. Yet, as spring yielded to the searing months of 1942, something shifted. The relentless discipline of the Ford method, the iron will of its workforce, and the sheer unyielding necessity of survival birthed a new kind of order among chaos. By the time America's hopes were most desperate, Willow Run found a heartbeat. And then the miracle began. Assembly lines snapped into rhythm. Each worker became a living gear in an immense humming machine dedicated to one singular aim: build bombers or watch the world perish. Women, many of whom had never wielded a wrench, learned to fasten rivets with the precision of surgeons. Supervisors slept on makeshift cots in the shadow of the ever-rolling line, driven by the memory of London's burning nights and the faces of loved ones fighting on foreign soil. Something both brutal and beautiful took hold, a collective purpose that made every hour sacred. By 1944, numbers that had once seemed delusional became terrifyingly real. Willow Run delivered a completed B-24 every hour at its peak, and not just metal husks, but soaring engines of war that would darken the sky over Europe, changing the balance of the conflict web. The men and women of Willow Run lived for that moment, the trembling rumble as each bomber was wheeled from the hangar, fresh with the fingerprints of 1,000 stories and a nation's future in its hold. When the last B-24 rolled off the line in June 1945, Willow Run had produced nearly half of all Liberators ever built, machines that turned the Allied air war from a desperate gamble to a relentless barrage that helped crack the very foundations of the Axis war. Machine Web 16 to Web 20 yet. For those who sweated and wept beneath the endless fluorescence, the numbers mattered less than the knowledge that history had tilted on a single audacious point in Detroit. The Willow Run bomber plant was not merely a factory. It became, in those years, a living monument to the possibility of American unity, a machine within which dreams of victory and salvation for millions found their engine. In every rivet, every weld, every battered lunchbox left behind after a shift, there echoed the pulse of an anxious world turning, just in time toward Hope. Webb Webyikes, such was the drama. The gravity, the inescapable urgency of Willow Run's creation. The world would never look at Detroit or at war the same way again. And as the shadows lengthened, and the sirens of victory began to echo faintly across the sea, a question lingered in haunted factories and silent fields. Had Detroit's gamble been enough to save civilization itself? That answer lay in the skies above where the engines thundered, bearing the fate of millions into peril and possibility. Thunder. That was the word that echoed through Detroit in 1944. Thunder not from the sky, but under the endless roof of Willow Run, where history was hammered hour by relentless hour. No longer a mere promise, the dream became reality as each B-24 Liberator, immense and gleaming, was born 63 minutes apart by thousands of hands moving in harmonious fury. This was the hour, the myth incarnate. Here America's greatest gamble rushed headlong toward destiny, with every worker's sweat measured in bombers complete and hopes redeemed. Yet, the legend did not emerge unscathed from chaos. Willow Run's earliest months had been defined by agonizing setbacks, absentee workers, long commutes made hellish by gasoline shortages, and strike threats that sapped morale. The word spread fast. This was one of the poorest producers, battered by constant turnover and management's uncompromising anti-union stance. Supervisors often wondered if their dream would collapse before it even began. But adversity is a crucible, and in the heat of labor, solutions appeared. Ford's engineers drew up new technical schematics daily, wrestling with the ever-evolving design of the B-24 that threatened to undo every stride forward. Each bomber needed 125,000 parts, and every blueprint challenged the limits of what factory life could accomplish. Web. The transition from despair to victory was not solely mechanical. As Detroit's men disappeared into battle, women marched into Willow Run with fierce patriotism. Rosie the Riveter, the icon, became reality, not in posters, but in the tireless arms and stubborn hearts of thousands. They replaced fathers and brothers, wielded tools and their own dreams, and slowly bent the arc of war in Detroit's favor. Their loyalty, resilience, and sweat were stamped onto every bomber. By the spring of 1944, Willow Run resembled a teeming city whose citizens, men, women, immigrants, strangers, slept on cots near the assembly lines, marking each day with bombers finished and fears overcome. Progress accelerated in dramatic waves. Ford management, led by Edsel Ford until his untimely death in 1943, reimagined production, decentralizing operations, sending 80% of a bomber's parts as knockdown kits to Douglas in Tulsa and consolidated in Fort Worth. Willow Run focused on final assembly, where the pulse of Detroit pressed onward. The factory's rhythm was unyielding. April 1944 set records that silenced skeptics. 4 28 B-24s soared out that month, with one single feverish push delivering 100 bombers in just 3 days. Each departure was marked by crowds, pilots, mechanics, and proud locals watching hope take flight toward Normandy, Berlin, and the Pacific Web. Victory over skepticism was now a fact. As Willow Run contributed nearly 7,000 complete bombers and almost 1,900 kits by war's end. Detroit, once dismissed as incapable, became the arsenal that the War Department called indispensable. The statistics were staggering. 70% of America's B-24s came from Willow Run in 1945, and the factory had peaked at producing 650 bombers in a month. Every aircraft carried not just weapons, but the heartbeat and human cost of a nation at war. Willow Run's legacy was more than just numbers. It lived in memory, in every family whose loved ones built, tested, or flew these metal giants through fire. The myth of perfection faded, exposing the relentless struggle beneath. Edsel Ford never saw the final triumph, and thousands of anonymous workers departed when the last engines roared and the final doors shut. Victory was bittersweet, an offering granted by unity, urgency, and exhaustion. As peace approached, the rhythm slowed. The last bomber emerged, gleaming in the sun as Detroit gathered to say farewell. Willow Run's machinery did not die quietly. It became a monument to cooperation and innovation. The hour-long miracle ended with an echo, reverberating far beyond Michigan. a testimony to what happens when desperation and hope collide at the edges of catastrophe. Detroit had not simply delivered, it had rewritten history's question and challenged fate itself, and in the hearts of those who lived through the myth, sunrise after sunrise was a living testament to the hour when thunder was forged from steel, sweat, and possibility. Willow Run's pulse became their own, a rhythm that would truly never fade. The engine of change, unleashed by Detroit's gamble, refused to die out, and in the restless silence that followed, the world waited for its next miracle. Haunted and inspired by the legacy of victory, stamped into every rivet, every blueprint, and every memory of the world's bravest factory. Bombers meant freedom, but Willow Run meant transformation. For the Allies, this hour of triumph did not just mean planes in the sky. It meant supply lines finally secured, missions flown, knowing that reinforcements would always arrive, and a strategic confidence that shifted the fate of nations. Missions such as the daylight raids over Ploesti, the liberation of France, and the steady destruction of Nazi infrastructure all leaned on the iron certainty of Willow Run's assembly line. Reports from the front lines grew more optimistic. Commanders planned and executed larger strikes, knowing Detroit's miracle factory stood behind them, web and a web. Inside Willow Run, the tempo was frantic, yet the spirit was foundational. Every corridor buzzed with laughter, exhaustion, and stories. Managers slept in offices, workers forged camaraderie over midnight sandwiches, and local radio announcers tracked the plant's progress as if following an Olympic race. There was pride, but also a deep dread. For many, each bomber represented a twin hope and terror, the dream of victory paired with the anxiety of the loved ones now airborne over hostile territory. Unsung heroes included truck drivers shuttling kits by night, secretaries guiding the never-ending paperwork, and janitors keeping the floors spotless as history wrote itself around them. With Germany's surrender, the collective psyche shifted, time no longer measured by bombers completed, but by memories accumulating. Liberators returned home, some as scrap, others immortalized in museums or remembered in stories that grandparents shared decades after peace arrived. The factory itself became a symbol, repurposed for peacetime production, marked as a heritage site, visited by thousands, seeking to touch the story of how thunder was shaped from American willpower. And through all this, a final lesson crystallized. When crisis converges with ingenuity, unity, and necessity, miracles are not only possible, they become inevitable. Willow Run's answer to the air war was not a mere technical fix, a production solution, or political statement. It rewrote how nations envision industry, the home front, and humanity's capacity to unite under existential peril. In every hour of triumph, in every flash of steel beneath Detroit's gray sky, the world learned that what seemed impossible could become routine, if only there were enough urgency, enough hearts, and enough thunder. The hour ended, but its echo did not. Willow Run had bent the course of war, of industry, and of hope. In its wake, other factories would rise, other miracles be sought, but none could ever quite recapture the exact harmony of desperation and deliverance that rang out across Detroit in 1944. The memory still lives, unbroken, in the roar of engines, the cadence of stories, and the eternal promise that another miracle waits, just beyond the next turning of the hour. Detroit's air thunder did not erupt overnight. Willow Run's transformation from peaceful farmland to the epicenter of unstoppable industrial power was fraught with uncertainty, setbacks, and a long journey through dark nights that challenged every belief America held about its own strength. By autumn 1943, the shadow of Charles Sorensen had given way to the steady hands of Meade L. Bricker. The government, responding to mounting urgency, pushed decentralization. Critical parts of each bomber were produced at other Ford plants and by various subcontractors, with Willow Run morphing into the final crucible, a mile-long assembly, temple where precision and speed were everything. Efforts were plagued by nearly incapacitating technical and personnel problems. Ford's immense experience in automobile production clashed headlong with the alien demands of aircraft assembly. Factory workers, conditioned to fit fenders and attach axles, now faced the impossible precision needed for wings and engines. Every mistake was magnified, Every setback threatened the Allied advance. Labor problems loomed menacingly. The factory's location, nearly an hour from Detroit's center, created arduous commutes exacerbated by rationing. One bleak month saw Ford hire 2,900 new recruits, only to lose 3,100 to exhaustion, frustration, and intractable strikes. Webb. Discontent simmered. Ford's leaders, aggressively anti-union, fought strikes that sapped morale and productivity. Even Henry Ford himself, cantankerous and rigid, resisted hiring women until reality forced his hand. With male workers drafted and shipped overseas, Willow Run's halls filled with Rosie the Riveters, their resilience cutting through the gloom. These women, drawn from every walk of life, became the secret artillery of American endurance. In every rivet, each deftly turned bolt, their legacy was sealed here. Problems were not just internal. The Army demanded a bomber a day, then a bomber an hour. Willow Run's engineers worked frantically to fix assembly line kinks and standardize parts. Mistakes, painfully public, filled Detroit's headlines. But by 1944, against all odds, the plant's relentless churn reached mythical velocity. A completed B-24 rolled out every 63 minutes, day and night, week after week, through all of April and beyond. This feverish pace meant 428 bombers in April alone. 100 finished and flown out between April 24th and April 26th, an industrial surge unmatched at any other Allied plant. Each month, production climbed. In 1944, Willow Run delivered 650 bombers at its height, a surge made possible through dogged innovation and sheer willpower. By consolidating work on 2 9-hour shifts, Ford achieved what had seemed impossible. 70% of America's B-24 Liberators for the final war year were born in Detroit's heart. This staggering machine could not halt for anything: illness, grief, fatigue, and even death. Edsel Ford, president and visionary, died in May 1943, never to see Willow Run operate at full throttle. His loss echoed in silent corners, but the army he forged pressed forward, bolstered by duty and memory. Willow Run's size was itself legendary. Architect Albert Kahn had designed the world's largest enclosed room, 3.5 million square feet of humming machinery. Paperwork and blueprints covered every desk. Pipes carried air to every corner. Cots lined the floor for pilots awaiting their new Liberators. The first B-24, a B-24E, rolled out in September 1942, though the earliest ones served in training. Their operational siblings arrived by June 1943 to join the mounting struggle against Germany. The plant's decentralization proved crucial. Knockdown kits, 80% of a bomber packed in trailers, were assembled elsewhere. Douglas in Tulsa consolidated in Fort Worth, while Willow Run focused on final builds. This network wove Detroit into every sky over Normandy, Rome, and the Pacific. The success reverberated. The plant ended WW2 with 6,972 completed bombers and 1,193 kits, joining forces for more than 8,800 aircraft, nearly half the world's entire fleet of B-24 Liberators. Yet, numbers tell only part of Willow Run's epic. Sweat and sacrifice haunted every campaign. As pilots slept on 1,300 cots awaiting their machines, workers endured insomnia, grief for loved ones abroad, and relentless pressure from supervisors. Bombers, each with more than 1 million parts, demanded relentless focus. The noise of rivet guns, the rolling echo of trolley carts, and the ceaseless pounding of iron became a symphony of urgency, pain, and hope. For Detroit, this forged a new destiny. No longer just an auto city, it was the engine of freedom, its pulse timed to Allied survival. The thunder of Willow Run lifted morale at home and terrorized the Axis abroad. For the ground crews and flyers, each hour's rolled-out B-24 meant another strike at tyranny and one more chance for victory to take root. The miles of conveyor lines, the speed of the hourly build, became living prophecy, a triumph that redefined American manufacturing and the meaning of unity in crisis. Willow Run's victory had its price. Factories can build planes, but only people can build legends. Detroit's answer was not just technical, it was heartbreak, sacrifice, and collective determination. The final aircraft left the line in May 1945, as bells rang for peace. The plant's silence was as legendary as its power. Its shadow stretched across continents, a testament to what was possible when urgency demanded miracles. And as the shadows of Wotu lifted and families reunited, Willow Run's legacy burned on. The workers, old and young, men and women, immigrant and native, had written an answer to the future with steel and human sweat. The final bomber gleamed beneath a Michigan sun as crowds wept and cheered. In every blueprint, every cut, and every echoing thunderclap lay Detroit's promise kept. Willow Run was proof that in the darkest hour, unyielding steel, tempered by courage, could change the course of war and the fate of millions. History would not forget the hidden front that beat within the world's most remarkable factory, Webb. Webb turned to Webb. By spring 1944, the Willow Run bomber plant roared at full throttle, its 1-mile assembly line alive with urgency and relentless focus. Walls of glass and steel encased a titanic operation where every minute ticked toward destiny. The ghosts of early failures were swept away as Detroit's faith in its own power, fueled by sacrifice and stubborn ingenuity, finally bore fruit. Here the mythology crystallized, one bomber rolling out every 63 minutes, day and night, a feat so audacious that it made headlines across a war-torn globe. Webb Doon, Webb Ni, Ford's journey to this moment had been harrowing. The earliest attempts to shift automobile methods to the complexities of B-24 production were plagued by setbacks. Lack of blueprints forced engineers to reverse engineer thousands of parts. Shifting designs from consolidated aircraft scrambled plans and sometimes halted assembly altogether. So, labor turnover remained a daily crisis, with over 40,000 workers cycling through Willow Run's ranks at the height of production. Fon. The government's pressure forced Ford to decentralize. Critical B-24 components were built at other plants and by dozens of subcontractors, with Willow Run responsible for final assembly, a war machine at the heart of a national network of hope. Webb. Assembly inside. Willow Run was a marvel of logistics and organization. Fuselages, wings, and tails converged at precisely timed junctions along the line, creating a symphony of progress as each bomber grew from scattered parts to soaring weapon. The scale was immense, 3.5 million square feet of factory space, more than 25,000 initial drawings, 10 miles of conveyor belts, the greatest enclosed room in the world of Webb Tau. At its peak, Willow Run delivered 428 bombers in April 1944 alone, including a legendary surge where 100 aircraft flew out in just 3 days, or series. But it was not just machinery that made Willow Run unrivaled. Thousands of women, many new to industrial work, filled the void left by men called to war. Fierce and determined, the Rosie the Riveter generation welded, riveted, and bolted machines destined for the firestorms over Normandy, Berlin, and the Pacific. After prolonged labor disputes and management's resistance to unionization, the plant environment stabilized, allowing innovation to flourish. Ford's 2-shift system, 2 9-hour stretches each day, became legendary, achieving a production rate that stunned both allies and enemies. The scale of achievement stunned the world. By the end of the war, Willow Run produced nearly 8,700 B-24 Liberators, almost half the entire Allied fleet, including 1,293 knockdown kits, 80% complete, sent to Tulsa and Fort Worth for final assembly. Bounds Webb 40, Webb 20. Pilots and crews bunked in on-site dormitories with 1,300 cots, awaiting their aircraft with restless anticipation. Their lives intersected fate at every dawn, swaddled in sleep and anxiety, as iron titans rolled out beneath the floodlights. Webb 2. On the home front, entire towns rose overnight to shelter Willow Run's workforce. Willow Village, hastily built by federal agencies, housed thousands in trailers and prefab shacks, crude coal stoves offering warmth through bitter Michigan winters. Families braved the uncertain life of war laborers, grief, fatigue, and determination mingling in every silent meal. The plant employed more than 42,000 people at its zenith, paying testament to unity and ambition in a time when survival meant banding together for causes larger than any single life. Economic miracles accompanied industrial ones. The delivered price for each B-24 dropped from $238,000 in 1942 to just $137,000 by peak output, a drastic achievement made possible by relentless process improvement and unflagging commitment. For many, these savings meant more planes, faster missions, and a more direct path to victory. Willow Run's output rivaled entire nations. Its March 1944 production nearly equaled the total airplane output of Japan in that year, a thunderous tale of American scale. Detroit's gamble forever changed air combat. B-24s from Willow Run led daylight raids over Ploesti, battered Nazi supply lines, and offered salvation at the critical junctions of the Pacific Front. Commanders planned grand operations, knowing Detroit's miracle factory would supply the wings, the armor, and the steel backbone of victory. Each hour's production altered strategies, turned tides, and reshaped hope for soldiers on the ground and families at home. Webb, crew. But the legacy was more than statistics. Willow Run birthed stories woven into every blueprint and midnight shift. Managers sleeping in offices, engineers updating blueprints overnight, truck drivers racing knockdown kits through storms, and machinists risking injury to meet quotas. Heroes of another kind. Their names often lost, but their impact etched into the victory the world would not forget. Edsel Ford's vision shaped a factory as much as it shaped the future. Though he never saw Willow Run's triumph, his leadership paved the way for the impossible, pushing boundaries even as his own health and spirit were spent. The plant's story was always one of fierce unity. The final bomber rolled off the line in June 1945, as bells across continents rang in the peace so desperately earned. Detroit's answer was no mere technical fix. It was an entire nation's heartbeat, stamped hour after hour into machines born for war and remembered for generations. As peace returned, Willow Run's thunder faded to a whisper, but its lesson endured. American ingenuity and collective sacrifice had won out against fear, disaster, and impossibility. Willow Run was proof, a monument of glass, steel, and tenacity. Each bomber built stood as promise kept. As families and nations drew fresh breath in a world once again open to the hope born of thunder forged in fire. D. In April 1944, just outside Detroit, a mile-long miracle unfolded with the relentless pulse of progress. Willow Run no longer seemed doomed to fall short. Its timers were now the metronome of hope in a continent under siege. Every 63 minutes, the assembly line delivered another B-24 Liberator, the world's most produced heavy bomber, into the hands of exhausted crews and anxious pilots. At its apex, 428 planes roared out in a single April, with 100 thundering into the sky over just 3 electrified days. In that stretch, Detroit's gamble reached its zenith. The factory, built at Ford's expense, operated with federal support, had finally become the arsenal of democracy President Roosevelt envisioned. None of this came without scars. The chaos of the plant's earliest months had tested the patience of America's most hardened industrial minds. Auto workers skilled at making Fords found the labyrinthine puzzle of a bomber twice as demanding. With 1.2 million individual pieces assembled at standards 1,000 times more stringent than those for the Model T, blueprints were revised daily. Strikes, absenteeism, and confusion battered production. People commuted an hour from Detroit, suffering gasoline and tire rationing, their faces carved by fatigue. Ford's anti-union stance created friction, threatening to halt the miraculous operation before it began. Leadership pivoted to meet crisis. Charles Sorensen and Edsel Ford became heroic figures, the latter eventually succumbing to cancer and stress before seeing the full extent of Willow Run's triumph. The U.S. government demanded decentralization, with kits, comprising 80% of the bomber, now shipped as far as Tulsa and Fort Worth for final assembly. A network of factories and subcontractors became arteries feeding Detroit's living heart. Willow Run ultimately accounted for nearly half of all B-24s built globally. 6,972 bombers complete and 1,193 kits, totaling 8,165 planes before the plant shut in May 1945. As peace swept across Europe and Pacific, Weber 29. What made the factory more than a mechanized marvel was the people. Men shuffled on the line until the draft emptied entire departments. Women, thrust into the breach, redefined not only war work but American identity itself. Rosie the Riveter was real. Hundreds were trained to weld, install engines and fasten wings on mile-long conveyor belts. Dormitories, cots, hastily erected villages, entire communities emerged around Willow Run, with tens of thousands rotating through its ranks in just 3 years of being sent to Poitiers. Detroit's triumph echoed far beyond Michigan. Ford's methods became international legend as Willow Run's process. Sub-assemblies developed and shipped, management centralized, blueprints standardized, spread to Allied factories in Britain, Canada, and the USSR. The enormous price of each plane plummeted from more than $230,000 to just over $130,000 by the war's end, saving billions in wartime budgets and freeing up resources for other critical fronts. At Willow Run's roaring height, it produced as many bombers in 1 month as Japan did in an entire year. These were not merely tools of war. Missions over Ploesti and Berlin, rescues at Normandy, and raids that turned the tide in Italy and the Pacific were made possible by Willow Run's hourly output. Pilots proudly described the sound of engines rolling into life as the music of survival. Each hour's production allowed not just for new attacks but for the recovery and repair of planes returning battered from combat. The plant's cadence filled the world's skies with hope, sometimes with agony. Every plane carried stories, families, memories, and sometimes the last breath of a crew member who never returned. Stories from the plant's floor reveal the cost and essence of unity. Managers slept in cluttered offices. Engineers worked shifts that stretched to midnight. Secretaries who never previously saw blueprints became technical experts overnight. American diversity in all its forms, immigrant, rural, urban men, women, rallied under Willow Run's arc lights, united by purpose and urgency. The shared adversity fostered friendships and rivalries, romances and heartbreak. The soul of a wartime city condensed into one building. Detroit's gamble changed the calculus of air war. Bombers from Willow Run and its dispersal factories not only led daylight raids, but gave commanders confidence to plan offensives with assurance of reinforcement. Pilots trained in the shadows of the plant slept nervously on its 300 cots, knowing tomorrow would deliver them not only their aircraft, but a chance to tilt fate's balance between hope and obliteration. By May 1945, as bells rang throughout liberated Europe, Willow Run's dance came to a halt. Its shutdown was bittersweet. Workers celebrated, grieved, and vanished into ordinary life, transformed forever by relentless effort and communal sacrifice. The arsenal that had saved a continent became quiet, the thunder of its machinery replaced by legacies born in photographs, documentaries, and folklore. Today, historians and families walk its grounds, pondering the miracle of mass production and the price paid in sweat, unity, and heartbreak. Web P48. Willow Run remains a lesson. When the hour grew perilous, Detroit answered with faith, steel, and daring. The factory's output was measured in bombers, but its legacy is written in every freedom preserved and every story carried forward. Detroit did not merely manufacture metal, it manufactured possibility. In every engine roar, every sigh of a tired worker, every rivet hammered beneath the floodlights, the hour that saved a continent still echoes, reminding the world that unity and hope are not just strengths in wartime, but necessities for survival and peace. Beneath the relentless drone of tools and machinery, Willow Run evolved into an industrial organism unlike any in modern history. The very heartbeat of Detroit pulsed through every girder and steel joint. Here, amidst the turmoil of war, the nature of mass production underwent a radical transformation, demanding not just scale but precision, adaptability, and an unprecedented willpower from its workers. Web. At first, the promise of a bomber an hour seemed pure bravado, a public boast fueled more by hope than by reality. Initial assembly lines struggled as Ford engineers, familiar only with the rigid demands of automotive work, faced the wild complexity of creating a machine with 1,000 to 125,000 distinct parts. Drawing up technical schematics, reverse engineering without sufficient blueprints, and adapting swiftly to specifications that shifted by the month became the daily norm. Congressional investigators swooped in, documenting procedural chaos and the meddling of original contractors. Webb case. Morale was battered but never defeated. As labor crises raged and turnover spiked, one infamous month saw 2,900 hires countered by a loss of 3,800 workers. Still, the allure of purpose kept Willow Run alive. The call to unity rallied Detroit. Management reimagined production, implementing decentralization, with sub-assemblies taking shape throughout Ford's universe of plants. Converging at Willow Run for the final act Webiser. By autumn of 1943, Meade L. Bricker led the plant with renewed focus. Decentralization fostered expertise and efficiency, allowing Willow Run to focus its titanic energy on aircraft assembly, not minor parts fabrication. Webb. The plant was an engineering marvel, designed by Albert Kahn. Its 3.5 million square feet stretched across Ypsilanti soils. Fuselages, wings, and tails rolled forward on 10 miles of conveyor, watched by eagle-eyed mechanics and managers, ready at a moment's notice to halt and recalibrate. The cacophony became music, metallic hammers, shouts between shifts, the whistle signaling the end of another frantic day. Webb. As 1944 dawned, adversity gave way to revelation. Ford's innovation had scaled the mountain. Willow Run rolled out Liberators at an unimaginable clip. Every 63 minutes, another bomber raced from the doors. In April alone, 428 B-24s left the line, including a dramatic burst of 100 planes over 3 days. By then, workers labored in 2 9-hour shifts. Each month's tally reached as high as 650 planes. 70% of America's B-24s in 1945 bore Willow Run stamp. Webb. Webb. Every wing, bolt and instrument panel was the product of masterful logistics and tireless learning by thousands of new faces. Women filled the gap left by drafted men. They became icons, American resilience in the flesh, riveting and welding alongside machinists, supervisors, and engineers. For many, their hands and sweat propelled not just assembly lines, but Allied dreams of ending the war. Webb. As managers juggled blueprints and laborers worked nearly around the clock, knockdown kits, 80% finished B-24s packed in trucks, crisscrossed the nation for final assembly in Tulsa and Fort Worth. These kits extended Detroit's power, distributing the labor of survival across the heartlands. Over the course of World War II, Willow Run built 6,172 complete bombers and an additional 1,893 kits, for a total of nearly 8,900 planes, a legacy inscribed in every battle over Europe and the Pacific. Webb. 29. But Willow Run was also a city of longing and loss. More than 40,000 workers would rotate through its gates. A new community was born, living in hastily built villages and dormitories, sharing daily meals and nightly anxieties. Pilots awaiting their aircraft slept on cots in the plant itself, while families wore thin with worry and pride. The price was paid not only in hours or money, but in tears, fatigue, and relentless determination. The myth became tangible in battles where Willow Run's output tipped the scales. Bombers led daylight raids over Ploesti, shattered Nazi infrastructure, and made possible the relentless pressure that defined the final months of the European war. For the Allies, air superiority was no longer simply a hope. It was a guaranteed fact, sustained and sharpened with every new plane from Detroit's arsenal. Webb. After the victory bells rang, Willow Run's thunder turned to silence. The plant shuttered in May 1945. A generation returned home, transformed by labor, sacrifice, and the knowledge that they had shaped the fate of millions. The final tally, 8,865 B-24s, was more than a statistic. It was the living chronicle of sweat, unity, loss, and indomitable spirit. Detroit had not just built bombers, it had built confidence, democracy, and the possibility of peace. The arsenal of democracy both destroyed and redefined the world, 1 hour, 1 plane, 1 relentless shift at a time. With its closure, the ghosts of Willow Run lingered, echoing in the hearts and homes of those who answered the call, transformed struggle into triumph, and gave history a new definition. Strength forged in unity, hope hammered from steel, and victory measured not only in machines, but in the lives changed forever. The final year of Willow Run was marked by both triumph and exhaustion, as the plant, once a marvel of ambition and defiance, approached its historic climax. By the time peace swept across Europe in May 1945, the Willow Run bomber plant had transcended its own blueprints. Its story woven tightly into the tapestry of world history, a testament to the theory that one factory's transformation could shape the destiny of millions. Webb. Chapter 13. As dawn broke on the war's end, Willow Run stood silent, the hum of machinery replaced by the distant sound of radio victories and the shouts of homecomings. The plant's once frenzied mile-long assembly line, the same lifeline that had, at its apex, delivered a B-24 Liberator every 63 minutes, was now quiet, its lights dimming as engineers, laborers, and managers drifted back into normalcy or vanished into the post-war world. Webb. The records set here were nothing short of astonishing. 6,972 finished bombers, 593 knockdown kits, a peak of 428 planes in 1 month, and over 40,000 people working in concert to birth more than 8,800 B-24s. Webb in 12th, Webb 46, but the numbers only scratch the surface of meaning. What endures is the story, a symphony of labor, vision, agony, and hope that continues to reverberate through time. Willow Run had not merely produced machines, it had produced faith under fire, innovation under indescribable pressure, and new forms of unity for every American, from rural carpenters to urban laborers, from veteran machinists to the women who forever altered the nation's sense of itself. Website. Rosie the Riveter became an icon not just of wartime effort, but of social transformation, her contributions echoing into every future moment when ordinary citizens would again be called upon for the extraordinary. The city around Willow Run was changed too. Entire neighborhoods had risen overnight to support its workforce. Willow Village, a miniature metropolis of trailers and prefab houses, provided shelter to thousands. Men and women whose hands had polished steel and gripped wrenches awoke each morning not as bystanders, but as the guardians of hope. On the plant floor, romance, tragedy, humor, and loss unfolded at every turn. The war's end left these communities both relieved and restless, their heroism preserved and their purpose forever changed. As Ford's operations wound down and the final contracts disappeared, the physical legacy of Willow Run was quietly but efficiently repurposed, its cavernous halls hosting peacetime production or lying dormant as silent witnesses to their own past glory. Yet even as the machinery was silenced, local schools and museums began to curate relics and memories, blueprints marked with the fingerprints of night shift engineers, photos of the river of workers on their shift changes, fragments of diary entries from supervisors who had not slept a full night in years. Webmuck. On the broader world stage, Willow Run's ripple effect was profound. Allies around the globe studied its manufacturing cadence, learning lessons of scale and agility that would guide their own post-war industries. The template of a bomber an hour fed not only aircraft into the skies above Europe and the Pacific, but also ideas into every future mass production challenge, from skyscraper construction to the race for space. The fusion of government urgency and industry, innovation was a spark that would ignite countless achievements in the American century that followed, and perhaps most remarkable is what the people themselves took from those years. Many never spoke openly of the fatigue, the marriages that buckled under strain, the dreams that fluttered and vanished with loved ones lost in flight or in battle. Yet in every Willow Run handshake, in the laughter that returned after nights of despair, there was the deeper knowledge that their effort hadn't only built bombers at an unheard-of pace, it had built resilience. Each clock ticked not merely toward a finished aircraft, but toward freedom. And in that pursuit, fear itself was vanquished by determination and solidarity. The last B-24 off the line rolled beneath a Michigan sun that seemed to pause and pay respect. Crews gathered, some sobbing, some silent with exhaustion or pride. Reporters and officers praised the accomplishment, but the truest recognition came from within. A quiet, lasting pride flowered in the hearts of all who passed through Willow Run's gates. Their effort was not in vain. Every bomber lost, and every one that returned home alive bore their spirit to the ends of the earth, written not just in metal but in memory. Today, with the passage of decades, Willow Run remains a place of pilgrimage and study. Its story told in documentaries and school lessons, its echoes found wherever crises breed innovation and unity. Planes that once soared from its floor now sit in museums, their polished skins reflecting the faces of visitors who gasp at the scale and audacity of what was achieved. In the DNA of every major emergency effort since disaster response, peacekeeping, the building of great civil works, the magic of Willow Run endures, a blueprint for miracles under pressure. The legacy of Willow Run is not only about what America built, but about who America became. It is an inheritance of faith in collaboration, a caution against the seduction of certainty, a reminder that the greatest triumphs are born not from arrogance, but from people's willingness to answer history's most urgent call. Here in this once quiet patch of Michigan, strangers from all walks of life learned that possibility could outshine fear, that courage could prevail over despair, and that unity, tempered and forged by adversity, might just change the world. In a lineage of conflict and peace, of ambition and humility, Willow Run stands for the enduring truth that the arc of history bends when countless ordinary people refuse to give in to the impossible. Its story deserves to be retold again and again, not only to remember what was won in those hurried hours, but to inspire the courage to meet whatever awaits over the next horizon. The hour that changed the air war will never truly close. There will always be echoes of Willow Run, calling the next generation to courage, urgency, and hope. If you've stood with us through the thunder of history, you know there's always more beneath the surface. Hit subscribe now and ring the bell, because every story of war, courage, and consequence deserves to be told. Join our ranks, dive deep into the untold battles, and become part of the mission to remember. Your next chapter starts here.